Maya had never seen a sunset. She'd never watched rain fall against a window or seen her own reflection in a mirror. Born completely blind, her world existed in sounds, textures, and most importantly, music. At 17, while most teenagers were busy with their phones and social media, Maya spent her evenings in a different kind of world. In the corner of her family's small apartment sat an old upright piano. The wood was scratched, some of the keys stuck occasionally, and it was definitely out of tune. But to Maya, it was perfect. Her fingers would dance across those worn keys for hours. She didn't need to see the piano to know exactly where every note lived. Her hands had memorized the slight chip on middle C, the way the F-sharp key clicked a little before it played, the smooth coolness of the ivory under her fingertips. This piano had been her best friend since she was 5 years old. Maya's music teacher, Mrs. Lopez, had been working with her since elementary school. The elderly woman had taught piano for 40 years, and she'd seen hundreds of students come and go. But Maya was different. Mrs. Lopez noticed it during their very first lesson together. Most students played the notes on the page. They followed the rhythm, hit the right keys, and called it music. But Maya didn't just play music. She felt it. Every piece told a story through her fingers. When she played something sad, you could hear heartbreak in every note. When she played something joyful, the room seemed to light up with energy. The thing was, Maya's family didn't have much money. Her father worked long hours at a warehouse, and her mother cleaned offices at night. They'd saved for months to buy that old piano from a neighbor who was moving away. Fancy music schools and expensive private lessons weren't even a possibility. Everything Maya learned came from Mrs. Lopez's twice-weekly lessons and her own countless hours of practice. Mrs. Lopez often told her, "You have a gift, sweetheart. A real gift. The world needs to hear you play." But Maya would just smile and shake her head. The world seemed so far away from their tiny apartment and that old piano. Then one day, everything changed. Mrs. Lopez came rushing into their lesson, out of breath and more excited than Maya had ever heard her. "The International Youth Piano Competition is coming to our city. Maya, you have to audition. You absolutely have to." Maya's stomach dropped. A competition? With judges and an audience? The thought terrified her. She was happy playing in her small corner of the world, where nobody judged her and she could make mistakes without anyone watching. "I can't do that," Maya said quietly. "I'm not good enough for something like that." "Not good enough?" Mrs. Lopez practically shouted. "Child, you're the most talented student I've had in 40 years. You can do this." It took 3 weeks of convincing. Mrs. Lopez was relentless. She explained that the competition wasn't just about winning. It was about showing the world what Maya could do, about proving that talent comes from the heart, not from expensive schools or fancy training. Finally, Maya agreed to try. They chose Chopin's Ballad No. 1, a piece that was technically challenging but also deeply emotional. For the next 2 months, Maya practiced like never before. Her fingers flew across the keys until she knew every single note by heart. She could play it backward if someone asked her to. The music became part of her breathing. The preliminary auditions were nerve-wracking. Maya sat in a small room with just one judge, her guide dog Buddy lying quietly at her feet. Her hands shook as she began to play, but within seconds the fear melted away. The music took over and she forgot about everything else. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the judge cleared his throat. His voice sounded thick with emotion. "That was remarkable. You're moving forward to the main competition." Maya couldn't believe it. She'd actually done it. She was going to perform on a real stage in front of hundreds of people. The next few weeks were a blur of practice and preparation. Mrs. Lopez helped her prepare not just musically, but mentally. They talked about staying calm under pressure, about focusing on the music instead of the audience, about remembering why she played in the first place. Finally, the day arrived. The competition was being held at the city's biggest concert hall, a beautiful old building that Maya had only heard about but never visited. When she and Mrs. Lopez arrived that morning, she could feel the energy in the air. Nervous teenagers and their families filled the hallways. She could hear snippets of scales and arpeggios as competitors warmed up in practice rooms. What Maya didn't know was who would be sitting at the judges' table. Among the panel was Victor Petrov, one of the most famous pianists in the world. His concerts sold out months in advance. He'd performed for presidents and royalty. His recordings were considered the gold standard of classical piano. But Viktor Petrov was also known for something else. He had a reputation for being brutally honest, sometimes even cruel. He believed that classical music required absolute perfection, and he had no patience for anyone he considered unworthy of the stage. As Maya waited backstage, listening to other competitors perform, she had no idea what was coming. She sat quietly, running through the piece in her mind, her fingers unconsciously moving through the motions on her lap. Buddy rested his head on her foot, calm and steady as always. One by one, she heard the other pianists take their turn. Some were brilliant, hitting every note with precision. Others made mistakes, and she could hear the disappointment in the audience's polite applause. Each performance brought her closer to her own moment on stage. Mrs. Lopez sat beside her, holding her hand. "You're going to be wonderful," she whispered. "Just play from your heart like you always do. That's all you need to do." Maya nodded, but her mouth felt dry. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone backstage could hear it. This was it. This was the moment that would either prove she belonged here or confirm every doubt she'd ever had about herself. When her name was finally called, the sound seemed to echo through the backstage area. Maya stood up, her legs shaky. She reached for Buddy's harness, and together they made their way toward the stage entrance. Mrs. Lopez walked beside them, guiding her toward the moment that would change her life forever. Behind the curtain, she could hear the murmur of hundreds of people in the audience. She could feel the heat of the stage lights even from where she stood. In a few seconds, she would walk out onto that stage, sit at that grand piano, and play for more people than she'd ever played for in her entire life. She took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and stepped forward into the light. She had no way of knowing that she was about to face one of the most humiliating moments of her life, or that what came after would leave the entire world speechless. The stage felt enormous. Maya could sense the space around her. The way sound traveled differently in this huge concert hall compared to her small living room. Her footsteps echoed softly as Mrs. Lopez guided her across the polished wood floor, one hand on Buddy's harness, the other trailing slightly to keep her balance. She could hear whispers from the audience. Hundreds of people were watching her walk to the piano. Her cheeks burned. She'd never felt so exposed in her entire life. Finally, her fingers touched the smooth edge of the grand piano. It was beautiful, she could tell. The wood was perfectly polished, and when she brushed her hand across the keys, they felt cool and precise. Nothing like her old piano at home. This instrument probably cost more than everything her family owned combined. Mrs. Lopez squeezed her shoulder gently, then stepped away. Maya was alone now, except for Buddy, who settled at her feet. She took a deep breath and positioned herself on the bench, adjusting her posture the way Mrs. Lopez had taught her. Her hands hovered over the keys, and she closed her eyes, even though it made no difference. She was about to begin, when a voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Stop." The word echoed across the hall. Maya's hands froze in midair. Her heart, which was already racing, seemed to stop completely. "This is a waste of everyone's time," the voice continued. It had a thick accent, European maybe. The tone was sharp, dripping with dismissal. Maya's hands began to tremble. She had no idea what was happening or who was speaking. The audience had gone completely silent. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could sense the tension filling the room. "A blind pianist?" the voice said, and now Maya understood. He was talking about her. "This is not a serious competition if we are allowing this." The words hit her like physical blows. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never come back. Her face felt hot with shame. Another voice tried to interrupt, softer, more diplomatic. "Mr. Petrov, perhaps we should—" "No," the harsh voice cut in again. This was Viktor Petrov, the famous pianist, one of the judges. "I will say what needs to be said. Music requires more than just touching keys. It requires seeing the score, understanding the composer's written intentions. How can someone who cannot see possibly interpret music correctly?" Maya's throat tightened. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. Every worst fear she'd ever had about not being good enough was being spoken out loud in front of everyone. "This is a prestigious competition," Victor continued. "Not a charity event. Not a place for feel-good stories that make people cry. Real music requires dedication, training, and yes, it requires being able to see. I have spent 50 years of my life dedicated to this art form, and I will not sit here and pretend that this is acceptable." Some people in the audience murmured in agreement. Maya could hear them. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But no one was defending her. No one was telling this man to stop. Backstage, Mrs. Lopez was crying. Maya couldn't see her, but she could hear the soft sobs. Her teacher, the woman who believed in her more than anyone, was watching her student being torn apart and couldn't do anything to stop it. "You have no business being on this stage," Victor said, his final blow landing with devastating precision. "You are wasting the time of serious musicians." The head judge finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "Mr. Petrov, the contestant has earned her place here through the preliminary rounds. Perhaps we should allow her to perform and then—" "Let her play if you insist," Victor interrupted. "But I will not waste my professional opinion on this performance. I have already seen everything I need to see." The silence that followed was suffocating. Maya sat frozen at the piano, her hands still hovering uselessly over the keys. She could feel tears threatening to spill down her cheeks, but she fought them back. She would not cry in front of these people. She would not give them that. Every instinct told her to run, to stand up, grab Buddy's harness, and walk off this stage with whatever dignity she had left. She could go home, back to her small apartment and her old piano, and never put herself through something like this again. Nobody would blame her. But then something strange happened. Through the fog of humiliation and shame, she heard her father's voice in her head. He'd told her once, years ago, when kids at school had made fun of her, "Maya, people will always try to tell you what you can't do. Don't ever let them be right." Her hand steadied, just slightly, but enough. She thought about all those hours of practice, all those evenings spent at that old piano while other kids were out having fun. Every single note she'd learned, every piece she'd mastered, every moment of joy music had brought to her life. Was she really going to let one cruel man take all of that away? Mrs. Lopez had told her to play from her heart, to forget about the judges and the audience and just play. But now, sitting on this stage after being humiliated in front of hundreds of people, Maya realized something. She didn't need to forget about them. She needed to show them exactly what they were trying to dismiss. She took a deep breath, then another. Her racing heart began to slow just a little. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin slightly. Her fingers found their starting position on the keys. The audience was still silent, waiting to see what she would do. Some probably expected her to break down. Others maybe hoped she would just leave and end this uncomfortable situation. Victor Petrov sat at the judge's table with his arms crossed, already dismissing her before she'd played a single note. But Maya didn't run. She didn't cry. She didn't give them any of the reactions they might have expected from a humiliated teenage girl. Instead, she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 emerged from the piano, and they weren't timid or uncertain. They were powerful, clear, deliberate. Every ounce of hurt she was feeling, every moment of humiliation she'd just endured, every doubt she'd ever had about herself. She channeled it all into the music. Her fingers moved across the keys with absolute precision. The piece started gently, almost questioning, like a voice asking to be heard. But as it progressed, it grew stronger, more confident, more demanding. Maya wasn't just playing the notes anymore. She was telling a story. She was speaking to everyone in that hall without using a single word. The music said everything she couldn't say out loud. It said that she belonged here. It said that her blindness didn't make her less than anyone else. It said that real music came from somewhere deeper than eyes could see. The technical passages that made other pianists stumble came easily to her. Her left hand maintained the complex rhythmic patterns while her right hand sang out the melody. She didn't miss a single note, didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. But what made her performance extraordinary wasn't the technical perfection. It was the emotion. Every phrase carried weight. When the music turned dark and turbulent, you could hear her pain. When it soared upward, you could hear her defiance. She was playing with a depth of feeling that most pianists spend their entire lives trying to achieve. The audience sat in stunned silence, no longer uncomfortable or dismissive. They were captivated. Even those who had murmured in agreement with Victor's cruel words now found themselves leaning forward in their seats, completely absorbed in what they were hearing. At the judges' table, Victor Petrov's expression had changed. The arrogant certainty had vanished from his face. He stared at Maya with something that might have been shock or confusion, or perhaps the dawning realization that he had made a terrible mistake. The music built and built, each phrase more powerful than the last. Maya's entire body moved with the piece now, swaying slightly as her fingers raced across the keys. She was completely lost in it, no longer aware of the audience or the judges or even the stage beneath her feet. There was only the piano and the music pouring out of her soul. When Chopin wrote this piece almost 200 years ago, he'd packed it full of emotion. Joy and sorrow, hope and despair, all woven together in 9 minutes of music. Most pianists played it beautifully. Maya played it like she'd lived it. The middle section came, the part that always made her think of a storm. Her hands flew across the keys in rapid passages that would make most people's fingers cramp. But Maya had practiced this so many times that her muscles knew exactly what to do. The notes cascaded like rain, like thunder, like lightning striking over and over. In the audience, people had stopped breathing normally. A woman in the third row was crying quietly, tears streaming down her face. A teenage boy who'd performed earlier in the competition sat with his mouth slightly open, completely mesmerized. Even the other competitors backstage had gathered in the wings to watch, forgetting their own nervousness for a moment. Mrs. Lopez stood in the corner with both hands pressed to her mouth, tears flowing freely now. But these weren't tears of sadness anymore. These were tears of pride, of joy, of watching someone she loved prove the world wrong in the most beautiful way possible. The piece moved into its final section, building toward the ending that always gave Maya chills. This was where everything came together, where all the themes from earlier returned, transformed, stronger, resolved. Her hands moved with absolute certainty, drawing out every last ounce of emotion from the piano. The final chords rang out, powerful and definitive. Maya held them, letting them resonate through the hall, feeling the vibrations through the piano bench. Then silence. Complete and total silence. For a moment, Maya wasn't sure what was happening. Had she done something wrong? Had people hated it? The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, and doubt started creeping back in. Then she heard it. A single pair of hands clapping, then another. Then suddenly the entire concert hall erupted. The sound was overwhelming. People weren't just clapping, they were on their feet, shouting, cheering. The applause was so loud it seemed to shake the building. Maya sat at the piano, completely stunned, trying to process what was happening. Mrs. Lopez rushed onto the stage, not caring about protocol or rules. She wrapped Maya in a tight embrace, both of them crying now. "I told you," Mrs. Lopez kept saying through her tears. "I told you the world needed to hear you play." The standing ovation went on and on. 2 minutes.
3 minutes.
People in the back rows were whistling and cheering. The other competitors were applauding just as hard as everyone else, recognizing that they'd witnessed something extraordinary. At the judges' table, 3 of the 4 judges were standing and clapping enthusiastically. The head judge had tears in his eyes. The woman next to him was shaking her head in amazement, a huge smile on her face. But Viktor Petrov remained seated. His hands were in his lap, not clapping. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He stared at Maya like he was seeing a ghost, like everything he thought he knew about music had just been turned upside down. Finally, after nearly 5 minutes, the head judge had to step to the microphone and ask for quiet so the competition could continue. The audience reluctantly settled back into their seats, though the energy in the room had completely changed. Everyone knew they'd just witnessed something they would never forget. Maya was guided back off stage in a daze. Other competitors came up to her, telling her how incredible her performance was. One girl, who'd won competitions all over the country, said with complete sincerity, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." But Maya barely heard any of it. Her mind was still spinning, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd walked onto that stage humiliated and broken, convinced she didn't belong, and somehow through the music she'd turned it all around. The rest of the competition felt like a blur. Other pianists performed, some of them technically perfect, others making nervous mistakes. But everyone in that hall was still thinking about Maya's performance. It had set a standard that seemed impossible to match. When the last competitor finished, the judges retired to deliberate. This usually took about 30 minutes, but today it stretched much longer. Through the walls of the deliberation room, people could hear raised voices. Viktor Petrov's distinctive accent could be heard rising above the others more than once. Maya sat backstage with Mrs. Lopez and her parents, who'd arrived just in time to hear her play. Her mother couldn't stop hugging her, and her father kept saying, "Oh, that's my girl. That's my girl," over and over, his voice thick with emotion. An hour passed, then another. People started getting restless, wondering what was taking so long. Usually the judges agreed fairly quickly, but clearly something complicated was happening in that room. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, the judges emerged. The head judge looked exhausted, but there was a small smile on his face. Viktor Petrov walked behind the others, his expression still unreadable, his shoulders slightly slumped. The audience filed back into their seats. The tension was unbearable. Everyone knew who should win, but after Viktor's earlier comments, people weren't sure what would happen. The head judge took the microphone. He seemed to struggle with his emotions for a moment before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been an extraordinary competition. The level of talent we've witnessed today has been remarkable. He paused, looking down at the paper in his hands. I want to begin by announcing third place. He named a talented young man from the State Conservatory. Solid applause filled the hall. Second place goes to... He named a girl who'd been training since she was 3 years old. More applause, though it seemed almost automatic now. Everyone was waiting. The head judge paused for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with emotion. And the winner of this year's International Youth Piano Competition? He looked up, directly toward where Maya sat backstage. By unanimous decision of the judges, Maya Chen, the word unanimous hung in the air. That meant Viktor Petrov had voted for her too. The man who'd said she had no business being on stage had voted for her to win. The audience exploded. If the standing ovation after her performance had been loud, this was deafening. People were jumping to their feet, screaming with joy. Some were crying again. It felt less like a competition result and more like a moment of justice, of something being set right in the world. Maya was guided back onto the stage, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. Someone placed a trophy in her hands, heavy and cold. The head judge leaned in close as photographers snapped pictures. You didn't just win a competition today, he said quietly, so only she could hear. You reminded all of us why we fell in love with music in the first place. As part of her prize, Maya received a full scholarship to any music conservatory she wanted. But more than that, she received an invitation to perform at the International Piano Festival in Vienna next summer. It was the kind of opportunity that could launch a real career. Maya stood on that stage clutching her trophy, surrounded by applause and camera flashes she couldn't see. Mrs. Lopez stood beside her, openly weeping with pride. Her parents were in the front row now, holding each other and crying. But as Maya stood there trying to take it all in, she was acutely aware of one thing. One person wasn't clapping. Viktor Petrov had quietly left the auditorium during the announcement. The famous pianist who'd tried to humiliate her, who'd then been forced to vote for her victory, couldn't face the moment he'd been proven so completely wrong. Maya didn't know it yet, but that wouldn't be the last time she'd hear from Viktor Petrov. What happened next would surprise everyone, including her. Maya woke up the next morning thinking maybe she'd dreamed it all. But the trophy sitting on her dresser proved it was real. She'd actually won. She'd stood on that stage, faced humiliation, and turned it into triumph. What she didn't know was that while she slept, her story had already started spreading across the internet like wildfire. Someone in the audience had recorded the entire thing on their phone. Not just her performance, but everything. Viktor Petrov's cruel words, the awful silence that followed, then Maya's breathtaking response. They'd posted it online with a simple caption, "Famous pianist tells blind girl she doesn't belong. Watch what happens next." By morning, the video had 1 million views. By afternoon, 10 million. People were sharing it everywhere, commenting, discussing, debating. The story had touched something deep in people around the world. Maya's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News reporters wanted interviews. Music magazines wanted to feature her. Someone from a morning talk show called asking if she'd fly to New York to perform live. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. But the video did something else too. It destroyed Viktor Petrov's reputation almost overnight. People were furious with him. The comments under the video were brutal. How dare he speak to her that way? This is what's wrong with classical music. He should be ashamed. Concert venues started canceling his upcoming performances. Music schools issued statements saying his views didn't represent their values. Students who'd dreamed of studying with him were now withdrawing their applications. The music world, which had respected Viktor Petrov for decades, turned on him in a matter of days. His social media accounts were flooded with angry messages. Prestigious orchestras that had worked with him for years quietly distanced themselves. A recording contract he'd been negotiating fell through. Maya tried not to follow all the drama online, but it was impossible to avoid. Part of her felt vindicated. He'd tried to humiliate her publicly, and now he was facing consequences. But another part of her felt uncomfortable with how vicious people were being toward him. He was wrong, she told Mrs. Lopez one afternoon during their regular lesson. What he said was cruel. But I don't know if he deserves to have his whole life destroyed. Mrs. Lopez looked at her student with amazement. You're a better person than most, Maya. Not many people would show compassion to someone who tried to hurt them like that. 3 weeks after the competition, Maya received an unexpected email. It was from Viktor Petrov himself. Her mother read it aloud to her. Dear Maya, it began, I am writing to request a meeting with you. I understand if you refuse. I have no right to ask anything of you after what I did. But if you would grant me just 30 minutes of your time, I would be deeply grateful. Viktor Petrov. The email included his phone number and an address for a small rehearsal studio across town. Mrs. Lopez immediately said Maya shouldn't go. You don't owe that man anything. He humiliated you in front of hundreds of people. Maya's parents agreed. They didn't trust him. What if he wanted to hurt her reputation somehow? What if this was some kind of trap? But Maya felt something pulling at her. Curiosity, maybe. Or perhaps the sense that this story wasn't finished yet. I want to go, she said finally. But I want you to come with me, Mrs. Lopez. I won't go alone. A few days later, Maya and Mrs. Lopez arrived at the rehearsal studio. It was a small, quiet place with just a piano and some chairs. Victor was already there, standing by the window. When they entered, he turned around. He looked different than Maya remembered. Of course, she hadn't actually seen him at the competition, but she'd sensed his presence, his confidence, his certainty. Now, even without seeing him, she could tell something had changed. His voice, when he spoke, sounded smaller somehow. Tired. Thank you for coming, he said. I was not sure you would. Maya stood near the door, Mrs. Lopez protectively beside her, Buddy sitting calmly at her feet. I have spent my entire life dedicated to music, Victor began. His accent seemed thicker than before, as if emotion was making it harder for him to speak. I started playing piano when I was 4 years old. By the time I was your age, I was performing in concert halls across Europe. Music became everything to me, my whole identity. He paused, and Maya heard him take a shaky breath. I believed I understood what it took to be a great musician. I thought it required perfection, discipline, the right training, the right background. I thought I was protecting the art form I loved by setting high standards, by being honest about who belonged and who didn't. Maya listened quietly, her face neutral. What I said to you at the competition was unforgivable, Victor continued, his voice cracking slightly. I judged you before you played a single note. I dismissed you based on my own narrow, foolish understanding of what a musician should be. He stopped, seeming to struggle with his next words. And then you played, and in those 9 minutes you showed me how little I actually understood, how much I had lost sight of what music really is. Mrs. Lopez shifted beside Maya, still protective but listening. I have played that Chopin piece hundreds of times in my career, Victor said. I have heard it performed by the greatest pianist in the world. But I have never heard it played the way you played it. You didn't just perform the notes on the page. You spoke through them. You made that piano sing with emotion that I have spent 50 years trying to access and perhaps never truly have. There was a long silence. Maya could hear traffic outside, the hum of the building's ventilation system, her own heartbeat. Mr. Petrov, Maya finally spoke, her voice steady and clear. I don't need your validation. I never did. That's something I learned that day on stage. My worth as a musician doesn't depend on whether you or anyone else approves of me. Victor made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. You are absolutely right. You don't need anything from me. But I do need you to understand something, Maya continued. When you tried to silence me, you weren't just attacking me. You were attacking every young musician out there who doesn't fit the traditional mold. Kids with disabilities. Kids from poor families who can't afford fancy schools. Kids who don't look like what you think a classical musician should look like. Your words had power, and you used that power to tear someone down. I know, Victor said quietly, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. Maya felt Mrs. Lopez's hand on her shoulder, supportive and proud. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Victor said. I don't deserve it. But I am asking for the chance to do better, to use whatever influence I have left to help instead of hurt, to open doors instead of closing them. He explained that he wanted to start a foundation to provide instruments and lessons to young musicians with disabilities. He wanted to advocate for more inclusive policies at music schools and competitions. He was done performing, he said. His time on stage was over. But maybe he could spend his remaining years teaching, really teaching, with the humility he should have had all along. I cannot undo what I did to you, he said, but perhaps I can make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. Maya stood there processing everything. Part of her wanted to stay angry. He'd hurt her deeply, had tried to destroy her confidence in front of everyone, but she also recognized something genuine in his words and the way his voice shook with emotion. What you did was wrong, Maya said finally. Really wrong. And an apology doesn't erase that. But if you're serious about doing better, about helping other people, then maybe something good can come from something bad. She paused, then added, I forgive you, Mr. Petrov. Not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to anger would only hurt me, and I've got better things to do with my energy. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, Thank you. You are wiser at 17 than I am at 67. As Maya and Mrs. Lopez left the studio, Victor called out one more time, Maya, that performance. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. And I have heard everything. Maya smiled slightly but didn't respond. She didn't need to. She'd already said everything that needed to be said. 6 months after the competition, Maya stood backstage at the Vienna Concert Hall, waiting to make her international debut. This wasn't a competition anymore. This was a real concert, with people who'd paid actual money to hear her play. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. The scholarship she'd won had opened doors she'd never imagined. She'd chosen to study at the Vienna Conservatory, one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Moving to Austria had been scary at first. New country, new language, new everything. But the conservatory had been incredibly supportive, making accommodations for her blindness and pairing her with teachers who saw her ability, not her disability. Her debut album had just been released the month before. They'd titled it Playing in the Dark, which Maya thought was perfect. It featured pieces by Chopin, Beethoven, and some contemporary composers who'd written music specifically for her. Early reviews were calling it one of the best classical piano recordings in years. But tonight was different. Tonight she'd be performing live for an audience of over 2,000 people. Among them were music critics from major publications, famous musicians, and regular people who'd seen that viral video and wanted to hear her play in person. Maya took a deep breath, her hands resting on Buddy's head. The dog had been with her through everything. He'd been there that day at the competition, and he was here now for this moment too. Mrs. Lopez was in the audience. She'd flown all the way from home to be here, wouldn't have missed it for the world. Maya's parents were there too, sitting in the front row, probably holding hands and trying not to cry before the concert even started. And surprisingly, Victor Petrov was there as well, true to his word. Victor had spent the past 6 months completely changing his approach to music. He'd started the foundation he'd promised, raising money to provide instruments and lessons to young musicians with disabilities. He'd written articles for major music publications about the need for more inclusivity in classical music. He'd given up his performance career entirely and now spent his time teaching and mentoring. With a humility no one who'd known him before would have recognized, he and Maya had stayed in touch, exchanging occasional emails. Their relationship was complicated. Not quite friendship, but something like mutual respect. He'd asked permission to attend tonight's concert, and Maya had said yes. The stage manager touched her shoulder gently. 5 minutes, Maya. She nodded, rolling her shoulders to release the tension. She'd learned so much in the past months. New pieces, new techniques, new ways of thinking about music. But she'd also learned something more important. She belonged here. Not because any judge or critic said so, but because music was part of who she was, as essential as breathing. The lights in the concert hall dimmed. She heard the rustling of programs, the settling of the audience into their seats. Then silence. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice filled the hall. Please welcome Maya Chen. The applause started before she even walked on stage. Maya smiled, gripping Buddy's harness as they made their way out. The stage felt familiar now. not frightening like it had been at the competition. This was where she was meant to be. She settled at the piano, adjusting her position. The instrument was magnificent, a Steinway concert grand that probably cost more than most houses. Her fingers touched the keys lightly, feeling their perfect action. Then she began to play. She'd chosen to open with the same piece she'd played at the competition, Chopin's Ballad No. 1. It felt right somehow, coming full circle. But this time there was no humiliation to overcome, no point to prove. She could just play for the pure joy of it. The music flowed from her fingers, and the audience was spellbound from the first note. Maya had grown as a musician in these months, but she hadn't lost the raw emotional honesty that made her special. Every phrase still told a story, still revealed something deep and true. When she finished the Chopin, the applause was thunderous. But the concert was just beginning. She played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, bringing out the melancholy beauty in a piece that many people thought they knew until they heard her interpretation. She played a contemporary piece written by a young composer from Brazil, full of complex rhythms and surprising harmonies. For her final piece, Maya had chosen something special. A composer who'd heard her story had written a piece specifically for her, titled Vision. It was about seeing the world in different ways, about how limitation in one area can open up unlimited possibilities in another. As she played this new music, bringing it to life for the first time in public, Maya felt complete. This was who she was. Not a blind pianist, not an inspiration, not a viral video. Just a musician, doing what she loved, sharing something beautiful with the world. The final notes faded away, and for a moment, the hall was silent. Then the audience erupted. People leaped to their feet, applauding, cheering, some crying. It was another standing ovation, but this one felt different from the one at the competition. That one had been about justice, about proving someone wrong. This one was pure appreciation for the music itself. Maya stood and bowed, smiling widely. She could feel the love and respect flowing from the audience. This was what music was supposed to be about: connection, communication, emotion flowing from one human being to another. At the reception afterward, people lined up to meet her. Critics who'd written glowing reviews of her album, young musicians who saw her as a role model, regular people who just wanted to tell her how much her music had moved them. One woman, probably in her 60s, took Maya's hand and said with a shaky voice, "My daughter is blind. She's 12 and loves music, but she was too scared to pursue it seriously. After she saw your video, she started taking piano lessons. You changed her life." These moments meant everything to Maya. More than the awards or the scholarship or the album sales. The idea that her journey might help someone else find their own path. Later, as the crowd thinned, Viktor Petrov approached. Maya sensed his presence before he spoke. "Maya," he said quietly, "thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. Did you enjoy the concert?" she asked. "Enjoy is not the right word," he said. "I was humbled. Again. You have grown so much as an artist, yet you have not lost the quality that made you special from the beginning. That gift of making people feel." He paused, then continued, "I want you to know that the foundation is doing well. We have provided instruments to 43 young musicians so far. 3 of them have disabilities similar to yours. 1 has already been accepted to a prestigious music program." Maya smiled. "That's wonderful, Mr. Petrov, really wonderful. I cannot change what I did," he said. "But perhaps I can spend the rest of my life making sure no other talented young person is dismissed the way I dismissed you." "That's all any of us can do," Maya said. "Acknowledge our mistakes and try to do better." They talked for a few more minutes, then Viktor excused himself. As he walked away, Maya felt a sense of closure. The man who'd tried to destroy her confidence had become, in an unexpected way, an advocate for exactly the kind of inclusion she represented. Years later, when Maya was interviewed for a major music magazine, the journalist asked about that day at the competition. It had become legendary in the classical music world, the video viewed over 100 million times. "How did you find the strength to play after what he said to you?" the journalist asked. Maya thought about it for a moment. "I think there's a moment in everyone's life when someone tries to tell them they're not good enough, that they don't belong. And in that moment you have a choice. You can believe them and let them define you, or you can prove them wrong, not for them but for yourself. The journalist asked if she'd forgiven Victor for what he did. I did, Maya said, and I'm glad I did. Forgiveness isn't about saying what someone did was okay. It's about refusing to let their actions continue to hurt you. If I'd held on to that anger, it would have poisoned my music. And music is too important, too beautiful to be poisoned by anger. What would you say to young musicians who face similar discrimination or doubt? The journalist asked. Maya smiled. I'd tell them that music doesn't care what you look like or whether you can see or where you come from, or how much money your family has. Music only cares about one thing, whether you have something to say. And if you have something to say, if you feel music in your soul, then you belong. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The blind girl who was humiliated on stage had become one of the most respected pianists of her generation. She'd performed in concert halls around the world, released multiple albums, and inspired countless people to pursue their dreams despite obstacles. But more than that, she'd helped change the conversation about what a musician could be. Conservatories became more inclusive. Competitions created accommodations for musicians with disabilities. The classical music world, so often resistant to change, began to open its doors a little wider, and it all started with a 17-year-old girl, an old piano, and the courage to keep playing even when someone tried to silence her. Maya never forgot that day at the competition. How could she? But she didn't let it define her. Instead, she let her music speak for itself, knowing that in the end, that was the only thing that really mattered.